Mm, 1 second. Yeah. Uh, so for people who probably don't know Countryside, we are a 28-year-old adventure travel company. But over the period of time, we have started doing many more things in terms of even we take people out for leisure trips. But we definitely try to do
टीवी
something
के पे
different in familiar places.
अरे टीवी जो
Or
तो कहाँ बैसे
Kedar bhai, you need
अरे
to put
टीवी
yourself on mute.
हाँ
Kedar bhai, go on mute. Yeah. So what I was saying is like we try to do different things in familiar destinations, or we kind of go to unfamiliar destinations. And in the recent times, we have started taking walking trips in Europe and cycling trips in Europe. And we also do some iconic trips like Trans-Siberian Railways, which starts from Beijing and then ends up at Moscow. But probably for the future, it is going to be from Ulaanbaatar to St. Petersburg, or the other way around. And of course, expedition cruise to Antarctica. Yeah, so these are the kind of iconic trips also that we participate and we do. Uh, I will kind of not take much of time, but I will like to introduce today's our main guest speaker, Surya. Surya, can you come on screen?
I am on screen, I hope. Uh, can you see me, Milan?
Yeah, I can
Yes,
see
yes,
you.
yes, Sudhir.
Yeah. Surya, rather than me introducing you, I will kind of ask you a couple of questions and then you will get introduced kind of naturally. Yeah.
Sure.
So to begin with, Surya has been an engineering. He has done his engineering from Chennai, and then somehow post his graduation, he decided to go into the wild, and because of his passion. So I just told him that you are a exact character from Three Idiots. A
Well, I
perfect
finished my
character from
engineering.
Three Idiots out of the movie, or probably you are the inspiration for the movie. Okay, people like you become inspiration for the movie. Yeah. So yes, he has done that. And Surya, just because I want to keep it as a conversation, not kind of go through everything. But as I understand, you headed to Central India and you have spent a lot of time in Central India, kind of in the wildlife and being a naturalist. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so thank you, Milan, for firstly for having me today. It feels very nice to be talking about wildlife again, though virtually. I'm basically, for all of you who don't know me, I'm basically a guide. You can use fancy words like naturalist, expedition leader, anything. I'm a wildlife guide. I take people out on safaris, on walks, on longer expeditions to see different things. Initially, I started out in a new park called Satpura in 2010, 11. Basically, that's a park which was a new experiment in central India where people go to Bandhavgarh, Kana, Pench, and Panna for tigers. I started off in a park with almost no tiger sightings. So we were doing canoeing, walking, and we were doing camping, alternative experiences where we were trying to talk about the jungle from the bottom up. So I had a lot of interesting learning during my 5 years there. And I spent 2 years in Kana driving a jeep, showing people tigers and the sal forests of Kana. And that is how my time in Central India was. And we also managed to write the photographic guide to the wildlife, like dragonflies, butterflies, frogs, snakes, birds, and animals of Central India. 867 species we put into one book so that people who come into Central India are aware of what can happen. And all of that learning was only because we were walking the jungles every day, whereas every other guide in the other parks were driving and looking for tigers. So it was a very different but very interesting journey for me in Central India, Milan.
And Surya, as I understand, you have kind of authored some photo guide books. So can you just kind of explain us a bit about that also?
Yeah, so basically, we have all these beautiful, for those of you who are into wildlife or birding, you'll see that we have a mammal book, a beautiful bird book. There's Salim Ali, there is Inskip books, there's a lovely butterfly books by BNHS. There are all these books. But if you're a generalist, if you're interested in everything, you'll be carrying 6 books in your backpack every time you go for a safari or a walk. And we wanted to compress the useful information and make it one book where you have mammals, birds, butterflies, dragonflies, reptiles, and amphibians, things you see in the field, so that when you have all of them in one book, generally your curiosity is there. When you see something, you know you have one small book in your bag which you can use. And that was the whole purpose. And we gave it to all the guides in central India, and that made a huge transformation. So people started looking at birds, people started looking at butterflies, and it made a huge difference. And that was our first book, which came out in 2015. And last year in 2020, the one good thing that happened in that whole year was the fact that we launched our South India book, which has been our dream for the Western Ghats, for the Eastern Ghats, the Deccan, the coastline. And that was a huge task. It was 1,977 species of, again, mammals, birds, butterflies, dragonflies. So one book, one compendium, wherever you travel in the 6 states of South India, you have a single point reference to identify species. So we just wanted a guide to be there in everyone's hands when they don't have a guide with them. Someone like me or the many others who do guiding, we wanted them to be more curious and more independent when they're in the jungle, when they have books like that. So that is the purpose. Simplified, beautiful information.
Wow. So how many such books you have kind of authored?
We've done 3 till now, 2 photo field guides, and we've done 1 children's book. But there are many more. If this lockdown keeps continuing, I have nothing to do but to write. So I'm just writing right now. So that's what I'm doing.
Good. That gives you kind of an opportunity to kind of do something during these times. Also, like last 4 to 5 years, you have kind of spent extensive time, especially in Ladakh, I guess, kind of engaging with the communities in probably snow leopard awareness, I would say, more than using any other term. So can you kind of also tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically after my time in Kanha, my mentor Hashim Tayyabji, Rahul, who you know, Milind, both of them got together and called me, and we decided to go into Ladakh. And we were very keen to do one thing. We were very keen to work in non-protected areas. We didn't want to work in national parks or tiger reserves or wildlife sanctuaries. We wanted to work in areas where there was wildlife and there was a community, to create a model where the community takes up the responsibility to conserve the wildlife in their backyard. I mean, we are all familiar with the conservation models of Bandhavgarh, Kanha, Panna, Kabini, all those areas. But in Ladakh, it is 67,000 square kilometers of wilderness. And there is one small national park called Hemis National Park. So what about the wildlife that is outside? So we wanted to try that experiment. And this experiment actually started in 2012 in the form of
Surya, sorry, we have lost you. Surya?
to see how I can talk about.
Surya, we have lost you. Sorry. I would request everyone to just be patient. I will be connecting with Surya and ask him.
The number you have dialed is currently busy. Please try later.
Kiran?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have Surya's number with you? Since I was trying, but I'm getting it as busy.
No, I don't have his number.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Sorry. There's a little bit of a southwest monsoon happening, so the network is a little jittery. I hope it doesn't happen again.
No problem.
Let's see. Yeah.
Let's continue. So you were talking about Ladakh and the work that you have done in Ladakh.
Yeah. So we were basically very keen in 2016. Rahul, Hashim, and me, the 3 of us got together. And we were very keen to work in an area which is not protected. We wanted to work in an area which just had the community and wildlife. We didn't want to work in a national park or a wildlife sanctuary or a tiger reserve. And Ladakh was one of the best places where Rahul and Hashim had spent a lot of time in the 80s and 90s. And it's basically 67,000 square kilometers of wilderness. And there is one small national park in the middle. What about the wildlife outside and the communities outside? There was really nothing happening except for the work done by some NGOs. So we wanted to see whether tourism can succeed in bringing back wildlife into areas which are not protected. And we went in majorly over there in the year 2015. And from then till now, we've started working in two areas specifically, which I'll be talking about in the presentation today.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And Surya, this Ladakh, whatever you guys have done, and it has been greatly talked about in terms of the sustainable tourism circles.
Hmm.
So can you tell how did the whole equation was worked out with the locals and things like that?
Yeah, so we were always from the start, from 2010, wherever we operated, we were always keen to do something different and sustainable. Those are the two things. We didn't want to go into the standard run of the mill. If you go to a national park, all you do is get into a safari jeep early in the morning, have a hot bottle and go for a safari. I mean, that is great. So we started out in Satpura, like I told you, where it was a very different park, where there's a river between the outside and the park. So we started doing canoeing, we started doing walking, we started having days for the guests where we called it no motor day. So if they don't take a jeep safari any day and they do just walks, canoes, birding and things like that, we actually gave them perks when they wanted to do a no motor days. We wanted to be as carbon neutral as possible in some ways. And the thing about Satpura was the fishermen were converted into canoe guides, because when it became a tiger reserve, the fishermen didn't have the rights to fish. So what we did was we made them the guides for the canoes. Like all the local people who were relocated from the park, we had an exam for them. We chose them because it shouldn't be just that everyone who's getting relocated is chosen immediately. We wanted it to be the people who really wanted to be guides. So we got them and we walked with them for months inside the park, trained them how to be walking guides, because we have very few good walking guides in the wilderness in India, unlike Africa. So we set up a very different system in Satpura. And similarly in Kana, in Ladakh, when we went there, we knew Rumbak was there, the national park was there, tourism was there, where people used to walk and camp in tents and go see snow leopards with the locals. That was a system that was established by the Snow Leopard Conservancy. But why wasn't that system anywhere else? There were snow leopards in a lot of places in Ladakh. So we had to first go work with the conservancy, the Snow Leopard Conservancy, find out locals who are willing to work with us, find out areas where there were snow leopards. And then what we did was we didn't go there and build a lodge. We gave the community the money to build a lodge for us. And then we basically lease the lodge from them every year. And they pay us back from the lease amount. So the money eventually goes to them. The training is provided to them. And the ownership is with them. And we are just helping them run, market, and support themselves. And that is basically what it is. So we wanted that model to happen. And everyone, of course, in the lodge, the drivers, the guides, the people who work in the lodge, everyone except me and the chef were from the local area. And so because that happened, one of the most exciting things that happened in 2018 end was another community from a different area came and asked us, why can't you come and do this in our place? That is the biggest success we could ask for. So ever since then, we've been working in the new place also. So we have two lodges in Ladakh and both are doing very well. And we are also trying to revive the local toilet system. I mean, we initially wanted the Western loos and we wanted the flushes, but they have a very healthy local toilet system, which was great for dry, cold weather conditions. And we are trying to see what best way we can make it comfortable and nice and make that into the sustainable practices that we are trying to uphold in our operations.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. So I think Surya, fantastic. I think the background is exactly set now for you to take us through the winter landscape of Ladakh and to kind of show us this elusive cat that everyone would like to see. So I would kind of ask, I will ask you to share your screen now, and I will stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
Surya, you'll need to probably talk a little slow because there is a drag or a lag in the conversation because of the network issue. So you need to go a little slow, maybe. Yeah.
No problem. No problem.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I am just going to share my screen. Okay. Screen. Zoom. Start broadcast. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, great. Fingers crossed. Hopefully nothing happens. Sorry about the slightly patchy weather. I'm keeping my video off for that just to keep my bandwidth fine. Is that okay with you, Milan?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So just tell me if there is any issues, and also feel free to ask me any questions in between. We can keep it open. We can keep it free. There's no issues on that side. So
Perfect.
I wanted to basically talk about the work we do in Ladakh. And when I talk about the work we do in Ladakh, we are always going to be talking about Ladakh also, and the wildlife and the people. So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible because it could be a new place to a lot of you. So Ladakh, of course, we know is this beautiful place with beautiful people, small villages with beautiful towering monasteries rising in the closest mountain, pastel-hued mountain slopes, broad valleys, the large blue rivers and lakes. That is how we all look at Ladakh. The Indus Valley, of course, has its own history, its own diversity of people that have moved in along with the Silk Route. There's a huge varied history from the Namgyal dynasty to the Dogras. There's a whole lot of things happening. It is all very well chronicled in the Ladakh Chronicles and in some very nice books, some by Janet Rizvi called The Crossroads of High Asia, where she tries to put the picture of Ladakh in a very simple way in one book. So all of this is very good reading. I would suggest anyone who goes to Ladakh to read up a little bit about Ladakh. Also, Peter Hopkirk books on the Central Asian landscape and the Central Asian wars that happened many years ago. So there's a lot happening there, but today, and it's too much to talk about in half an hour. So today, let me start talking about what I really love about the place. I've always been the kind of person who likes off the beat destinations, off the run of the mill destinations, and wildlife. Also, when I go looking for things, I try to look for things where people haven't really looked for things before. For example, this monastery dates back to the 2nd century. And people who go to Ladakh know Alchi, but there are these private monasteries tucked away in the mountains, which people seldom talk about. And when we went looking for snow leopards, we went and saw places like this. They are absolutely stunning private monasteries whose keys have been handed down generations to a particular family in the nearby village. So yes, this is how most of the world and most of India looks at Ladakh. Beautiful people, festivals, a lot of peace, a lot of Buddhism, a lot of very cheerful people who are also always welcoming and always willing to host you. And it is all great, but this is my focus when I went into Ladakh. My sole focus when I went into Ladakh was to understand the snow leopard, to see where all it moved, to see what it did, and to see how best to conserve it, study it, and also showcase it to the rest of the world. That is kind of what our purpose was when I went to Ladakh. Before I jump into more detail about that, I wanted to talk a little bit about this Trans Himalaya. I mean, we keep saying Ladakh, but Ladakh is basically a landscape which is part of the Trans Himalaya. You can see the white crest of the Himalayas and the brown landscape beyond it. And that is the cold desert of which Ladakh is a part. So this is a landscape which is still constantly evolving geologically. There are still mountains which are being pushed up, valleys which are being broadened, cracks which are being widened because of the push of the Indian plate on the Asian plate, which created the Himalaya, is still an ongoing process. We cannot see this in real time, but in geological time, it is still something that is happening on a daily basis in Ladakh, which is why it's called the Trans-Himalaya or the cold desert, which is the land beyond the Himalayas. This is the city of Leh, the capital, of course, where a lot of work happens, a lot of the people are. In fact, in Ladakh, they say there's a population density of less than 3 people per square kilometer. And if you remove this city from the equation, then you'll probably have a population density of less than 2 people or less than 1 person even per square kilometer in the landscape. So we were starting at and looking at villages like this in the Zanskar and the Ladakh range, small, quiet villages which were living amongst the wilderness. Most of them were shepherds. Most of them did very little subsistence farming in the summer months, but otherwise they were living a very self-sufficient lifestyle. overall. But in a landscape like this is a particular valley in the summers, and this is the same valley in the winters. So it's a land of extremes. So though we call it a cold desert, it gets very hot and dry in the summers, and in the winters it becomes cold and dry. In fact, snowfall is an aberration over there. And the animals and the wildlife, along with the people, have adapted very, very well to this place. For example, in this picture, if you look closely, you can see that there's a snow leopard over there. That is how beautifully they've learned to adapt themselves into this treeless, rocky landscape. It's a treeless, rocky landscape. And the snow leopards, and not just the snow leopards, all wildlife have learned to camouflage themselves in the open. They've learned to handle the extreme weather conditions. And I'm not just talking about snow leopards or these blue sheep or mammals and birds, but there is also butterflies, there's frogs, there's reptiles. Can you believe that reptiles at 13,000 feet surviving temperatures of minus 20 degrees in the winters? And they're able to use the 4 months of hot summer to carry out their life stages in different parts of Ladakh. And that is how incredible the wilderness of Ladakh is. So to conserve the wilderness of Ladakh, in the 1980s, Hemis National Park was set up. So Hemis National Park is actually the largest national park in the country. But in the scale of things of Ladakh, it is still not very big. It's about 4,000 square kilometer. It's one of the best habitats for snow leopards, and it was set up in the 1980s. And a big reason for that and the conservation of snow leopards and Hemis National Park being on the world map of snow leopards was the Snow Leopard Conservancy India Trust, set up by the late director of the organization, Dr. Rinchen Wangchuk. This person basically wanted to see how we can actually conserve snow leopards, not just setting up a national park and saying snow leopard is a Schedule 1 species. He was really keen on getting to the ground level and seeing what best can be done to solve the problem between people and snow leopards. So like I said, they are very livestock dependent community in Ladakh. And because of the lack of wood, most of their corrals were open. The yak and sheep were basically in the open through the day and night. They were either grazing in the open in the day, and in the night they were just inside these stone corrals. And when snow leopards get in, they basically get in at night to kill one sheep or one yak. But because of the frenzy created inside the corral, sometimes they kill up to 40 to 50. So sometimes they can empty an entire corral in one night, though they're not willing to actually eat all of them, or they didn't want to kill all of them. What basically happens is that there is a frenzy created in the corral, and a person's entire earnings, his entire flock of sheep and goat, can disappear in one night. And this was a big problem in Ladakh in those days. And the people in return were poisoning and killing snow leopards, not because they hated the animal, because they wanted to keep their way of life intact. So this was the fundamental problem for snow leopards. But there was another big problem. How do you actually study them? It is so hard to see them. How do you know how many snow leopards are there? No one really knows how many snow leopards are there in India. How do you know where they walk? What do they do? What is their home range? What do they eat? None of it was really known when all of this was happening. So Dr. Raghu Chandawat and Dr. Rinchen Wangchuk and a lot of other people started studying snow leopards. And how they studied snow leopards was they chose this small area in Hemis National Park called Rumbak, where they started recording the tracks of the cats. They started camera trapping and studying individuals. They try to understand what are the areas they were walking in, where were they marking, how many cats were there, how many of them had cubs, how many of them were male, how many of them were female, how close they came to the villages, which were the problem cats. All of this was identified through the study. And in that process, what happened was even the locals learned a lot about the cats that they have lived with all their lives. And slowly, the Snow Leopard Conservancy also encouraged them to start homestays and welcome visitors and make sure they see snow leopards. So these guys, because of their local expertise and because of their working with the Snow Leopard Conservancy, they became very good at finding these cats. And their eyesight is incredible. I mean, you have to go there and see it to believe how amazingly they can find the cats in these vast mountains. So what happened was homestays were set up, people were hosted. The men from the homestays used to take the people out into the valleys to see snow leopards. And Rumbak became the first place where seeing a snow leopard in the wild became a reality. Before that, we had cases like George Schaller or Peter Matthijssen, who saw it by accident, but to actually see a wild snow leopard, tours became possible. So money went into the community started conserving the snow leopards, the cattle corrals were closed by wood, and there was a whole lot of interesting developments happening from the late 90s, early 2000s, all the way till 2010, 12. But going back to the first question Milind asked me, why were we there if everything was going so smoothly? You have to remember all of these were still happening only inside Hemis National Park in one particular valley called Rumbak. So Rumbak suddenly started seeing 200, 300 people coming and camping and staying in the homestays to see snow leopards. And it was great for that community, but none of it was going to the other places where the problem still persisted. So the problem of snow leopards still persisted outside, which is why we moved out of Hemis National Park and started looking for places outside Hemis National Park where we can do snow leopard tourism. And we came across two valleys, one north of the Indus, which is Ule, which is somewhere here. It is such a small village that is not even on the map. And the other village was Mangyu. So Mangyu came just 2 years back, but Ule has been in operation for the last 13 years. Initially, the people who went to Rumbak went to Ule just for a day to see ibex, because ibex was not something that you saw in the Rumbak area. But slowly, what happened was the locals of Ule started showing them snow leopards, and we wanted to go there and encourage them. So this is a small community with just 4 to 5 houses. And they were showing a lot of interest, and they really wanted the benefits of wildlife tourism to come to their area. And the Snow Leopard Conservancy also set up homestays there. But because of this mindset that wildlife can be seen only inside national parks, most of the tourists went to the Rumbak area. That is where we came in with us, with our skills of wildlife viewing, our experience in wildlife tourism, hospitality, and our marketing. We brought all of this there and told them if we continue the same model as Rumbak, as a homestay or a tent, we're not really setting ourselves apart. So we gave them the money to build a lodge. And Snow Leopard Lodge came about because of that. And we started leasing the lodge from the villagers. And it is still run as a community property, but we control the quality, the marketing, the guest experience, the programs, and all of that. So basically, we put money into the community, and we eventually want to make sure that the money is seen entirely by the community itself. So we found these 3 amazing guys who Kiran, who's part of Milind's team, has also met during his time there in February 2020. That's Nolbu, Morup, and Punsok. These 3 were our first spotters and continue to be our best spotters for snow leopards in this totally new area. You have to remember, this is not a national park. This is a place where Nolbu, Morup, and Punsok, the 3 of them used to hunt snow leopards. They used to kill wolves when they come close to their village. But now they have all turned, and they don't even mind if a wolf takes one of their sheep, because they know the benefits of seeing the wolf or keeping it alive or keeping the wolf wild and free far outweighs killing the wolf just because it's killed a sheep. So there has been a transformation in the mentality of the people of the area. And the one other big advantage that these areas had was there was a road network connecting the different valleys. Inside the national park, there were no roads. So a lot of people didn't go to see snow leopards because they had to walk at 13,000 feet for 2-3 kilometers every day to see snow leopards. And we wanted to make it comfortable and accessible even to people who are not that fit or that adventurous. And that is why this place appealed to us a lot. Both Ule and Mangyu have a very, very good road network from where you can access. So in fact, you have a good lodge with a heating system inside. You have comfortable beds. It's a very simple property. I mean, don't compare it to any of the great properties of Africa or even some of the best properties in central India. It is a very simple functional lodge, which is comfortable. There is electricity, there's heating, there's proper beds, there's a proper dining area, there's proper service, and there's proper toilets. Though we don't have running water, we still give hot and cold water in buckets because all the pipes freeze over in the winters. So, and you get all of this when you have such a view. You are living right in the heart of snow leopard habitat, along with this community which lives with snow leopards in their backyard, in this comfortable, simple lodge, which is made very thoughtfully to keep the conditions and the sustainability angle in mind. So this is what we achieved. And we didn't know what we were doing when we went in. We knew there were some snow leopards. We knew the guys could find it. But in our first group, we saw that people were seeing snow leopards right from our parking lot. This is the parking lot of the lodge with Nolbu's house behind. And we were seeing snow leopards right from the parking lot. So it is only a question of wanting and someone willing to take it up and do it in these places, that it is very clear that wildlife is there everywhere. All it requires is someone to look for it and the community to decide to conserve it. Both of these aspects fell into place in Ule and Mangyu, and we started seeing a huge change happening in the community and the area. And the beautiful thing about it was, you fly into Leh, you stay in a hotel like Grand Dragon, which is a very comfortable, beautiful place. You drive, you acclimatize over there, you drive 2 hours, and then you are in this remote village, welcomed by the locals, hosted by the locals in this comfortable lodge where you're seeing snow leopards. And you're not just seeing snow leopards, you're seeing ibex, you're seeing urial, you're seeing burrell, you're seeing pikas, you're seeing hare. There's a whole lot of wildlife to see. Though we call it the Snow Leopard Lodge, and that is the main draw for most people, you are seeing a whole lot of different wildlife in the mountains along with snow leopards. That is the habitat. You need to understand the habitat and the people to appreciate how beautifully and how elusive these big cats actually are. And one of the things which people seldom talk about are Tibetan wolves. They have always lived in the shadow of snow leopards. I mean, in fact, you get compensation when snow leopards kill your livestock, but for wolves, there's no compensation. So wolves are still persecuted by the communities there. They're still poisoned. They're still killed by the people. But slowly in areas like Ule, Mangyu, and of course the national park Rumbak area, wolves are making a comeback. But in the rest of the areas, there is still a big problem of us losing the Tibetan wolves of Ladakh. And of course, where there is mammals and people, there is definitely birds. And we have recorded over 140 bird species just in the Ule area. That may not seem like much for people who go birding in different parts of the Himalayas or the Western Ghats. But you have to remember, this is a treeless, dry landscape. And to see so many birds in this place, you really need to know how to look for them, where to look for them. And you really need to have an appreciation for their ability to survive in these cold weather conditions. And this is the only souvenir we actually sell at the lodge. This is the snow leopard doll made from yak and sheep wool, made by the community. And they've actually started making them more accurately and much better. And this is a training provided by the Snow Leopard Conservancy to the local communities to increase their income from wildlife tourism. And we didn't want to stock anything else in the shops except for the local produce, which is basically dolls made from sheep and yak wool. And of course, when you come to Ladakh in winter, you need to see what Ladakh in winter is. I remember one of the people saying people need to come to Ladakh in winter many times. I think it was Mr. Joy, if I'm not mistaken. And it is very true. I mean, I've gone to Ladakh in the summers. It is a very, very different place. Ladakh in winters takes you 20 years behind what Ladakh in summers is. Ladakh in winters is like going to Ladakh in the 80s, 1980s or the 1990s. And you actually go there and there are these small villages. People go back to living in a very simple way. Whereas in the summers, there's tourism, they travel around, they're able to buy things. But in the winters, they go back to their sustainable, simple lifestyles. And once in a while, especially in February and March, there are these festivals that happen in Stoke. In November, you have the festival at Shemde. And this, of course, is the festival in February in the village of Likir, which is very close to our lodge. And we absolutely love going there because there is no tourists, firstly. It is only the locals celebrating in their local village monastery. And we are the only tourists. So in fact, even if there's a snow leopard scene on that day, some of the guests still want to go see this festival. And there's beautiful dances, there's singing, there's the spiritual side of the festival, there is the celebratory side of the festival. And we just stay there and watch this for a long, long time. We spend 2 days there sometimes. And our usual snow leopard program is around 7 to 8 days with 2 days of acclimatization in Leh. And if you can time it along with some of the monastic festivals, I can tell you it's absolutely worth it. If you come in the summers, all of these people will be replaced mostly by tourists because it is a big attraction to see a monastic festival, especially in like Tikse and Matho, which are like the popular festivals. But when you actually go to a quiet village and experience their festival, it is absolutely beautiful. And in fact, in the mountains around where you see this monastery, we have actually seen snow leopards. We actually work in Ule, but we work with the communities of 8 different villages who work with us to show us snow leopards. So we get an operational area which is much bigger than Ule. We have around 14 cats which occupy 14 to 15 valleys around our area. And that is how broad our influence of wilderness tourism is. And the company and the community over there have been welcoming changes like this, and they are very, very willing to work with us and show us insights into their wildlife and their lifestyle. So in Ladakh, one of the things we really loved after our project started was we started seeing more cubs. I don't have any baseline data to say that were there this many snow leopards before, because no studies were done in Ule before our time. But we started seeing more cubs. We started seeing an increase in the herbivores. In fact, the locals said they will not graze their cattle in some valleys because the herbivores didn't want any competition for the wild herbivores. So the Urial, the Ibex, and the Burrell that are there in the landscape suddenly had valleys just to themselves. And we started seeing more snow leopard cubs. Snow leopards were breeding better. Though I don't have baseline data to support this, I have seen a difference in the last 5 years of our study in that area. So we started seeing more cubs. We started seeing snow leopards going back to hunting wild animals. We started covering the cattle corrals with wood. That is a very simple solution. Because they didn't have wood, we provided them with either a metal mesh or wood to cover the corrals, along with the Snow Leopard Conservancy and other organizations. And a simple thing like that made the snow leopards go back to hunting Ibex, Urial, and Burrell, and depend less on domestic livestock. So one other thing I want to tell you, I mean, it's all great to talk about conservation studies, community involvement, but what does it take to actually see a snow leopard? In this frame, there are 3 snow leopards, and this frame was shot at from almost 400 meters away, and this was spotted by one of our spotters naked eye, if you can believe that. Just to give you an appreciation of how they see these things, you can see there's the snow leopards mating on the right and another male to the left. This is how incredible those spotters are. It's all great to talk about conservation, to talk about a comfortable lodge, to talk about hot water, to talk about great food, to talk about driving in roads. But if you eventually aren't able to see a snow leopard, then what is the point? So the whole idea behind Snow Leopard Lodge, or the whole support system behind the lodge, of course, is the community, but especially the spotters. We have one of the most incredible team of trackers in Ladakh who have been named as one of the top 10 tracking expeditions in the world by BBC. So in fact, Norbu, Frunsok, and Morub had an entire article written about them. And this is why they were able to pick out things like this in this landscape. When you and me go there, even after 5 years, I'm not able to match them. Though I talk about the geology, I talk about the birds, I talk about different things, I talk about the community, the conservation. To actually see a snow leopard, it is all down to them. And look at this landscape. It's like seeing a needle in a needle stack. That is how difficult seeing a snow leopard here is. And we, along with the spotters, and we have also been supported by Zeiss and Swarovski, who have given us their high-end optical scopes. And through that, what has happened is we are actually able to see them in high definition using a telescope, even if they are far away. And this has been a big step in actually appreciating and seeing wild snow leopards. This is the world of the snow leopard. This is their habitat. And this is how we see them and showcase them at Snow Leopard Lodge. And this is how your visit over there puts money back into the conservation model of the area. This is a simple idea of what we had done with the money we earned in the first 2 years. We had put these cattle corrals, a simple covering to cover the sheep and yak pens. And because of that, the snow leopards have gone back to killing wild prey. You can see in this picture a snow leopard with an ibex carcass. And this happened so much more after the simple covering for the cattle corrals were brought into place. Milind, any questions before I move on to the summer?
No questions, Surya. I think I was just kind of, even I was engrossed in looking at your slides.
No problem. I'm
Absolutely
just moving to the summer element. So I just want
Perfect. Just go ahead and we'll kind of take the questions at the end. Yeah.
Sure, Milind. Thank you. So Ladakh in summer, like I said, is a very, very different world. It is far more biodiverse. There's a lot more happening in Ladakh in the summers. In fact, if you're not looking for snow leopards, then coming to Ladakh in the summers for wildlife is probably much better than going to Ladakh in the winters. Um, Firstly, there is this vast, much bigger landscape that you can explore, because in the winters you are restricted to the Indus Valley because the passes are closed. In the summers, you can actually go into the Changtang Plateau. You can go to the high altitude lakes and marshes. You can look for things like the Tibetan wild ass. You can go to these absolutely gorgeous windswept plains and plateaus where the Tibetan antelope is seen. It is, in fact, Ladakh has one of the last 50 left in the eastern extremes of Ladakh. And actually, images like this are possible when you get to that flat landscape. And they're actually one of the most beautiful gazelle to see in that area. And for those of you who are interested in birds and birding, you go to these marshes. These are all frozen over in winters. You don't really see anything. But in the summers, they become breeding hotspots for most of the migratory birds, including birds like the black-necked crane. You have the Tibetan sand grouse, the Tibetan partridge, all the bar-headed geese from mainland India go and breed in these high-altitude lakes. So there's a lot happening. In fact, the Ladakh's bird list will go up to 400 species in the summer, from around 130 to 140 in the winters. So while the rest of India actually gets an increase in bird species in the winter months, Ladakh gets an increase in bird species in the summer months, because that is a breeding ground for most of our subcontinent's migratory birds. And when you have such bird life, you're always going to have small cats. In India, we have 15 species of wild cats. And we have 3 species of cat in Ladakh: the snow leopard, the Eurasian lynx, and the most secretive of them all is the Pallas's cat, which you get around these high altitude marshes. Again, in the winters, it becomes very difficult to see them because it gets very difficult to access their habitats. But when you come in the summers, or just even spring and autumn, are very, very good times to come to Ladakh to look for these cats. And talking about spring, if you just like landscapes and flora, May is one of the best times to come to Ladakh to see the valleys in flower. There's a lot of flowering, especially in the years where there's very high snowfall. There is very, very good flowering that happens because the ground is very well irrigated. So in the summers when the snow melts, there's a very there's like an outburst in some valleys of flowers. People talk about the valleys of flowers in Uttarakhand, but there are such places in the dry landscape of Ladakh too. In fact, one of the most beautiful things to see in terms of flowering in Ladakh, though it is a little bit artificial, but it's still a spectacle, is the apricot blossoms in spring. I mean, we all talk about the cherry blossoms in Japan, and people from all over the world go there to see it. But in the months of April and May, towards the end of our snow leopard season, we actually take guests to some of the villages where they have these large apricot groves, and the whole village is pink in color because of the apricot blossom. It's an absolutely stunning, stunning sight. And we were talking about the other lesser wildlife. We actually have the oldest butterfly species in the world. I mean, this butterfly, the Apollo, has been surviving in these cold conditions from before the ice ages, simply because their larval and pupal stages is underground. So they were able to survive the ice ages because they were able to go dormant underground. Similarly, this snow toad, the cliff racer, the toad agama, the rock agama, and all the butterflies are able to survive by hibernating underground through the winter months and coming out in the summer. And talking about hibernation, my most favorite mammal in Ladakh has to be the Himalayan brown bear. We see them during the start of the snow leopard season in November and December, and we see them in April and May. And we see them in parts of Western Ladakh. And they hibernate through the winter months. And in the summer months, you can actually see them breaking out of their snow dens and coming out and looking for food. And most of them have given birth during hibernation. So the cubs actually come out in the summer to see the outside world for the first time. And this is actually the largest land carnivore in the country, not the tiger. The Himalayan brown bear is the largest land carnivore in the country. And there is not a single place dedicated to protect the Himalayan brown bears. In fact, most of the bears we see in Ladakh are outside protected areas. So along with another organization in Western Ladakh, we are trying to extend what we have seen happening in snow leopard landscape to Western Ladakh to ensure that the brown bears get the same attention, the same protection, and the communities who live amongst the brown bears also get the benefits of the fact that brown bears are there in their backyard. So there's a lot happening in Ladakh. There's a lot that needs to happen in the future. But there is a fundamental reason why Ladakh has so much wildlife. It is surrounded by the Himalayas to the south, the Tibetan Plateau to the east, and the Hindu Kush and the Karakoram Mountains to the north. So what has happened is there's been a migration of species that came into Ladakh through the valleys over the centuries, especially after the last ice ages. And what happens is Ladakh has become a single sample space for North Asian, Eurasian, Himalayan, and Tibetan wildlife. In fact, if you come to Ladakh and if you can actually access all of Ladakh, you can actually see species which are found all over Tibet, all over the Mongolian plateau, all over the Karakoram ranges, all over the northern slopes of the Himalayas. So we have the Cape hare from Persia and North Africa, and the woolly hare from Tibet. We have the long-tailed marmot from Europe and the Himalayan marmot from Himalayas and Tibet. We have the Himalayan ibex from the south and the Kashmir markhor, which is found in the Pir Panjal and the Kashmir ranges. So you actually have a huge conglomerate of species in the small area called Ladakh. And that is why Ladakh is a very, very special space, especially in the summer months, to see wildlife. These are just 3 examples. There are over 100 examples of species which have moved into Ladakh. But after Ladakh, they're not found further, but they're found in their home ranges from where they've come. So Ladakh is an excellent sample space. But wherever you have such a fragile environment, wherever you have such a beautiful mix of species, you are going to have problems, especially in Ladakh with the problem. Ladakh has actually its own problems of water. It has issues with borders. The wildlife of Ladakh doesn't know borders. We have erected artificial borders with China and Pakistan, and some of the areas are heavily fortified. Some of the areas are fenced. So the Tibetan antelope cannot continue its migration to lakes in Tibet and come back to its breeding grounds in eastern Ladakh. Because of the proliferation of army camps and because of the change in lifestyle of the people, there's a lot of food waste available in Ladakh now, which has increased the local dog population almost 100-fold. So now you have feral dogs roaming and killing wildlife in different parts of Ladakh. And the most difficult thing, which is the strangest thing to comprehend, is that they have started mating with the wolves locally. And there's a new kind of animal that's coming in Ladakh, which is locally called a kipshang. The locals call it a kipshang, and the kipshang is now seen more often than an actual wild, truly genetic wolf. So there's a huge array of problems in Ladakh. The problem of snow leopards has been solved in some valleys, but that is not the end of the story. There is a lot more that needs to be done, like the brown bears, like the black-necked cranes, like the wild ass, like the wolves, like the Tibetan antelope. There's a whole lot of different things that needs to be achieved in Ladakh over time. And I'm sure we'll be able to do it, but not all of it can be done just by creating protected areas, not by creating national parks and tiger reserves. It has to be done with the community. And hopefully more people will follow suit, and more communities will join the process of conservation. It doesn't have to be tourism. It can be many, many different things. We know tourism, so we operate in the bracket of tourism and wildlife, but there are different things that can be done in different places in different ways to help that area, that community, and that particular set of wildlife in its own way. Thank you so very much. I hope it wasn't too much to take in, but Milind, I'll leave it open for questions.
Yeah, I think you can stop the screen share so that we can all see each other.
Sure.
Surya, it was fantastic. Actually, I just wanted you to continue with the presentation. Because you rarely get to see such pictures and things like that. And trust me, I've been kind of visiting Leh since 1986. That was my first trip when I was probably 20, 21-year-old. Yeah. And once second, let me just adjust the view. Yeah. And post that, I've been kind of visiting very often to Ladakh because of my business, where we take people on various trips, including trekking trips. So I've seen Ladakh in your summers and went to the different trekking routes. also, I've been on Chadar Trek a couple of times, so I've seen in Ladakh in winters also. But you gave a completely different perspective because the kind of wildlife, the butterflies, and things that you could show us, probably we never had the eye for that. We never spotted them. Yeah, apart from kind of seeing some bharals and wild asses and maybe mammoths en route.
Mhm.
That is it. Yeah, but this was fantastic. I think this was just fantastic. What I will do, Surya, is I will kind of put the house for a Q&A session. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. Rest of you, please be on the mute because that will kind of avoid any commotion. And then we can open up those people one by one. We can take on. Yeah. Uh, so I think Sushma, you can go ahead. Sushma has a question. You can
Hi,
put on your camera
Milind.
also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
and show us your
Okay.
coffee. Surya, they are joining us from US, so
Okay.
they said this is a coffee time for us.
Hi, Surya. It
Hi,
was
Sushma.
fabulous. And I lived in Ladakh for a year in 2004, working for some film documentary. My question would be, uh, first of all, this is not a very widely popular kind of a tour, just like chasing polar bear in Canada and other stuff. Very less coverage. My direct question is to what kind of help, assistance you could get from the government, district administration, or it was all self-managed through the locals?
Well, I'll put it this way. We would love for governments to recognize the work being done in non-protected areas. So there is still not, like you have in Africa, right? I mean, we were talking about popular tourism. We have actually private conservancies in Africa where people can conserve, people can buy lands, they can work with the community and they can conserve and have their own sanctuaries. But the government does not recognize that in India. So in India, they have their own ambits of protection, their own verticals, and then everything else is non-protected area. It'll come under revenue land and irrigation land and things like that. So we have basically taken those areas, and in fact, there's actually some documents that have been submitted in the Rajya Sabha to recognize private land participation in conservation, or even conservation outside protected areas. But for now, it has been all the community, the local NGOs who have supported us. And we still actually have to give a forest department fee because we are coming to see wildlife, though they have nothing to do with it. But we just do that to keep the peace. But more than that, we would love to work with the government and the government to recognize it is not just us. There are projects like this all over the country. There are people working with fishing cats in West Bengal. There are people working with red pandas in the eastern Himalayas, all outside protected areas. But none of that is recognized. And if the government decides to go there and do something else, they can still do it.
Okay.
So
Thank
for now,
you.
it's just.
Okay. And do you have, will you be sharing your book information, photography book information, as well as your website by the end of this chat?
Sure, I can put it in the chat box for sure. I'll do that.
Okay.
In fact, I
Okay.
also wanted to tell Milind and all of you who, if you're really keen on a biodiversity of Ladakh kind of thing, I have a 1-hour session on my YouTube channel, which is there in my name, the same spelling. And it is an easy watch, but I try to make Ladakh, the wildlife of Ladakh, simple and easily explained in simple brackets through the summer, winter, and different habitats. But that's more detailed on the biodiversity side of things than the actual snow leopard expedition. So I just wanted to let everyone know if anyone wants to see it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sushma. Thank you.
So Surya, definitely put up your website and the books as Sushma mentioned on the chat box. Yeah,
Sure.
and I will just read out one question that I kind of came across in the chat box about what is the best time to spot a snow leopard? How much time people on an average spend spotting on a day or one in a day? Okay. What else
Okay, so
can
I'll put it
they
this way.
do for the rest of the day?
Okay, so I'll put it this way. The tour, like I said, is minimum 4 nights at the lodge at least. the tour is minimum 4 nights at the lodge with 2 nights acclimatization in Leh and 1 night back in Leh before you fly out. So in your 4 nights, I usually prefer to do say 7 nights, but it may not be possible for everyone. But most of our photo trips are 7 nights. Basically, what we do is the whole trip is very slow. You have to remember you're at 13,000 feet. We are not very active through the day. The spotters are, I am, but the guests really need to acclimatize before they can go in and go out and see things. So it is not just the snow leopard we talk about. We talk about the whole thing. The whole USP is go live and experience life among the people who live among snow leopards. So when you talk about things like that, we talk about the community, we talk about private monasteries, we talk about monasteries, we talk about landscapes, we talk about short hikes, we talk about long hikes, we talk about birding, we talk about finding wolves, ibex, understanding the conservation, visiting the snow leopard conservancy. There is a whole lot of different things happening. And everything else takes a backseat when a snow leopard is seen. And talking about snow leopards, we usually, if we see them in the morning, we see them the whole day. If we see them in the evening, we of course see them till sundown. And out of the 45 groups which we did in our last operational season, which was 2020, all 45 saw at least one snow leopard. Some of them saw 2. And if you sometimes get them on a kill or if you get a mating pair, they stay in the same place and you can even see them for all 7 days of your tour. So it entirely comes down to your luck of seeing things. But we have over the years understood the snow leopards of the area better. The locals have understood the snow leopards of the area better. We have a larger area of operation and we have vehicles. So we can comfortably go to different places when we get information and go see snow leopard. So seeing a snow leopard is not a problem, but understanding the landscape, the habitat, and taking back a really clear and a real picture of the place is the bigger challenge than actually finding snow leopards.
Perfect, Surya. Any more questions? I can't see anybody raising their hands. Okay, so, but there are a lot of kind of feedback, Surya, that we have got in the chat box.
Okay.
Where everybody is happy with the photographs and the way you have explained, and they're thanking you for the work that you have been doing in Ladakh. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I've also put the website and the
Yeah.
guidebook website on the chat box as well for those who are interested. For some reason, my iPad makes automatic spaces, but there's no spaces. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you can't control all that. Yeah. Practically, Surya, I personally do not have any questions, but I have to kind of come and experience the way Kiran has done it. So I have to be once in the winter to kind of in your lodge to kind of spot a snow leopard.
Mhm.
And hopefully meet you there and you can take us around and show something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not? I'll be happy to.
Yeah.
And the truth
Yeah.
is, whatever questions I answer now, all the questions are best answered when you come and experience it yourself at the property. That is the best way to solve the problems.
I could see somebody kind of telling me that, Milind, when we are going to kind of do a snow leopard trip. So I hope we are going to do it very soon.
Yeah, I hope so. I
Somebody
hope to
else has
see all of
raised
you
a
there.
hand. Yeah,
Yes.
Sanjay Parab has raised his hand. Yeah, Sanjay, you can unmute yourself and go ahead with your question. Sanjay? Hello? Sanjay, can you hear us? Sanjay Parab, are you there? I don't know.
Maybe he's asked in the chat box.
Maybe, okay. Somebody has asked how risky or safe is it? That's a question from Sanjay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Risky, well, there is just one important thing, the acclimatization. When you come to Ladakh, especially the winters when you're flying into Leh Strait, it is very important for you to acclimatize. That is where we take total control, and it is like martial law. We take your vital readings. We make sure that you're absolutely comfortable before you go to the lodge. So once you're comfortable health-wise, there is no further risk of any sort. You're not hiking in slippery ground. We also give you a checklist of things that you're supposed to carry, you're supposed to wear, all of those things. All the details are very well presented before your tour. So there's no such risk of any sort. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is the fact that you are coming to an extreme environment, and the advice that we give, or people like Milind who are coming along with you tell you, should be taken very, very seriously, especially during the first 3 days of acclimatization. And after that, once you're fine, you enjoy the trip more. In fact, in the last 5 years, because of our the way we do things, we've actually had to send back only 2 people in 5 years because it was necessary to send them back to Leh and to Delhi to make them feel better. But otherwise, everyone else, including a 96-year-old, one of my greatest achievements in life is showing a snow leopard to a 96-year-old from the car by putting a chair and putting the scope where he was sitting, and he saw it in the scope, and he had his lunch watching a snow leopard. And then I sent him back to Delhi. And that was the thing. We actually wouldn't take 96-year-olds, but there was some communication gap with the American tour agency, and they didn't tell us. And when he landed in Leh, I realized he was 96 years old. So it's not much of a risk. It is possible. It is only, the important thing is you should be mildly fit. And apart from that, it is just important for you to have an open mind and also listen to us in the first few days.
Perfect. Surya, there's one more question with the recent kind of border conflicts and things like that. Does recent China conflict in Galwan has any impact on this? This is a question from Gaurav Virkar.
Gaurav, okay. Gaurav, I'd like to put it this way. Everything in Ladakh depends on the political situation there. The entire finance revenue of the place depends on the political situation there. The whole lifestyle of the community there depends on the political. So if Ladakh goes into war, then all their connect with the rest of India stops. The supply stop, the people coming in stops, the money train stops, everything stops. So there is an effect of conflict. In fact, the last 2 years, ever since COVID has happened, what has happened is there's been no tourism in the summer or winter. Very few people are taking the risk and going to Ladakh, especially the smaller villages. And I have actually said, we don't want the effects of COVID coming to our villages. So where there were homestays, there are no more homestays. So the income levels of a lot of people have come down ever since COVID started. So it is not any different with Galwan or Pakistan or China or any such conflict. In these areas, as long as it's safe for people to come and go, they're extremely dependent on people like us coming and visiting, and their lifestyle depends on that and their sustenance. So Galwan was an episode, yes, but any such thing, including COVID, will have a lasting impact on the lifestyle of the people over there. And because it has an impact on the lifestyle of the people over there, it has an impact on conservation and wildlife.
Thanks, Surya. Surya, one quick question before I kind of ask Mrs. Radhika Dipre to kind of go and ask you a question. There's one question from Gaurav again asking whether there's any minimum age for children to join.
Definitely. Definitely. There is, we put the minimum age for kids at 12, simply because it is very important to be able to comprehend what physical symptoms you're feeling if you're feeling uncomfortable. A child will not be able to tell that. They won't be able to say they have a headache or they have a blocked nose or they're feeling breathless. We need to be able to tell. All of this is down to only the acclimatization. We just want to make sure you're in a very comfortable place. But we will be able to address you only if you're able to communicate if you're feeling any discomfort at any point. So that is the reason we have a minimum age of 12 at the lodge.
Perfect. Radhika madam, you can kind of go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, actually, he has answered my question before even asking when he talked about that 96-year-old person. Surya, I am almost 68 running. So I am after Milind for last 2 years to take me there. But since Corona is there, we are not able to go to Ule. Kiran knows this. Yes. How about going there? The people of my age, will that be very comfortable?
No problem at all, ma'am. I don't think there should be any problem at all. Like I said, if you can, anyone who comes, it doesn't. So Ladakh, because of its altitude and how dry it is, affects people to an extent. So it doesn't matter whether you're 70 or you're 5 years old or you're the fittest athlete who is 30 years old or you're a smoker. It doesn't matter. The altitude affects people differently. But if you do the acclimatization right, and the fact that we have vehicles, most of our wildlife viewing is from the lodge itself, you will have no discomfort of any sort. If you are, and the Ladakhis have a lovely way of saying things. They actually say it is only as cold as what you wear. So if you clothe yourself comfortably, if you wear the proper down jackets, if you have the right shoes, then there should be no problem.
No, walking is the main issue nowadays. I have been trekking in Himalayas many times, but now age has become the problem, and now I'm not able to walk much. That is the big issue for
Walking
me.
is not absolutely necessary, but if you can do a little bit of walking, like flat walking, you experience the place better. You actually
Yeah.
can follow a snow leopard track. You can see where it is marked. I'm not talking about long walks. I'm talking about 300 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, flat valley walks. We take people on that just to experience, even if it's not necessary for them to do a walk. So it is part of the experience, but you can do without it if you feel it's absolutely not possible for you to do it.
Yeah.
But your fitness actually doesn't determine the tour. Like I told you, it is only down to how you react to the altitude.
Yes, thank you. Will you,
Thank you.
like to share your number if it is possible?
Yes, I'm sure I can. Milind has my number, so
Okay.
I can ask him to put it on the email.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
somebody has also
Thank you.
asked for your email ID. So if you want to kind of put it on the chat, you can do that.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think most of the questions and things are answered, Surya.
Yeah.
Surya, I
There's
think
one
it
more
was
question, Milind sir.
fantastic,
There is one more
fantastic
question for food.
presentation.
Hi, Milind sir. There's one more question on food. Will it be
Okay,
vegetable
Sushma,
food will
okay,
be
how about
available at
food?
the lodge?
Vegetarian.
Everything is available.
Vegetarian food is available at the lodge.
Of course, we have
Okay.
to do gluten free. We have
And,
to do vegan. We cater to everyone, right? So there's all kinds of requests that come. So we have everything in place.
yeah.
So no
So I
issues
think
on that.
Surya, perfect. I think it was a fantastic session and it was a fantastic idea to have you on this Saturday. I
I'm
should
glad
kind
you
of
think so.
tell this to Rahul also, convey to Rahul also my thanks to him. Yeah.
Sure.
I think just everyone has enjoyed thoroughly and everyone has kind of seen Ladakh in different moods. I would put it up during the summer, during the winter, different types of wildlife, different types of kind of landscape. Of course, people and festivals are also there. I today you kind of mentioned in your kind of presentation somewhere that you go back in your time, and today only I wrote a bit about the trip that I'm doing to Zanskar,
Okay.
where I wrote that when you go across, you will come across some pretty villages with pretty monasteries or amazing monasteries, stunning landscapes, and even probably few nomads, and
Yeah.
which will take
In
you
fact, the
back
driving
in
route that
time.
you're mentioning, the driving route you mentioned from Darcha to Padum to Photopsar, Linkshed and
Yeah.
Zangla and out at Vanla. I have
Yeah.
walked the whole thing when there was no road, and it's going to be so beautiful when all you and your guests are able to go on that drive. It's one of the most beautiful places I've seen. There are snow leopards there. There are brown bears there. There is really beautiful. Suktal is an amazingly beautiful monastery. So I'm sure all of you will have a great time when you do that trip.
So, Surya, in 1986, when I went to Leh, I did the Lamaru to Darcha trek. So we started to trek from Lamaru and ended up in Darcha. And again,
And
repeated
22
the same
days?
thing.
What is it?
21 days, yeah. And again, did it the other way around from Darcha to Lamaru in 2001.
Wow,
so
fantastic.
I'm soon kind of going to Ladakh. Maybe I will be leaving on 16th of June. And we are doing the Sham trek. So most likely I will be visiting Ule. Yeah.
You'll meet Norbu, you'll meet everyone over there at Ule and Shukpachen and all those areas. Yeah.
Perfect. So once again, thank you very much, Surya. It was great having you. And thank you all the guests who are have participated on this Zoom session. I guess we will be able to do 1 or 2 sessions before I leave to Ladakh. And let me figure out a topic or figure out somebody else who can come and tell us some great stories. Yeah. So thank you so much. Anybody would like to kind of make a closing comment? Please go ahead. Suresh, but go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, Milind. Sorry, I got up a little late this morning here.
Yeah. No worries. You tell me.
Yeah. It's
How are
wonderful. I'm wonderful, Milind, and I never try to miss any of your sessions. When do you think people from US will be able to travel and join you guys, Surya and you on this trip?
That's a kind of a question that I think even our Prime Minister will not address as of now.
All right, wonderful.
Yeah.
Hopefully in 2022 we can join you in one of these
See,
trips.
I can
Looking
tell you
forward.
what is being talked about. What is being talked about is probably by the second half of 2022, the international travel should start off.
Okay.
Is what we are expecting it
Okay.
as. And because by then most of the vaccination would be done, most of the
Yeah.
things would be back in order.
Yeah.
Till then, I think it is going to be highly restricted, or maybe they would allow passengers who have completely vaccinated to travel
Yes.
in a time to come. Because I think that is what has started happening in US. If you're vaccinated, then you can move around freely.
Yeah.
That's what I understand. So I think realistically looking to second half of 2022, we should look at.
All right. Well, hope to see you and get together with you in Mumbai. Okay.
Very much. Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank
then.
you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending this session.
There is
and
one last
hope to
question.
see
There is
you
one
once
last
again.
question. Excuse me,
Yeah,
Milind
tell
sir.
me. Go ahead.
Can we combine Chadar Trek and Sporting Grey Goose Tour? It's from Sushma.
Yeah, we can do that. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much. But Sushma, just to kind of give you an idea,
He is our main
like I
tour
did,
guy. Milind.
I did. Suresh bhai, can you keep on mute? Yeah. Sushma, I had kind of gone on Chadar Trek thrice, and almost like 3 to 4 years back, or even little more. But there is a road that is kind of being built parallel to the river, and most of the construction is getting completed, I guess. So the fun of Chadar may not be there anymore. Fun of doing the Chadar Trek may not be there anymore, is what I feel, frankly. Yeah.
Oh.
Surya, if you are there, you can also add up to that if you want.
Yeah, I'm here, Milind. I'm very much here, and I agree with you on the Chadar thing, because the entire route is now, in fact, what you're doing as a road trip, part of it was the Chadar trek, and it is still nice as an experience to go and camp on the frozen river or walk on the frozen river. You can do that, and it's very easy to combine the two because the season is the same. But I would suggest you do the snow leopard part first because it's comfortable, you're acclimatized and everything. You're more comfortable when you're doing the Chadar trek after that, if you're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my intention was to getting the acclimatization for the people, first-time visitors to Ladakh. So you suggest